Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Here I am. Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, September 6th, 2023. It is, of course, time for another show, and so we're here to provide it. It's what we do. It is Wednesday. It still only feels like a Tuesday, but pretty soon it'll start to feel like a Friday or something like that. We had Monday off, and Joan came by for Tuesday that helped us mark the time, which means that we won't be all weirded out or think it's Monday when Greg Dworkin shows up for his regular Wednesday slot. Lots to catch up on, as always. It's an important day. Enrique Tarrio is going to get 22 years in prison, which seems like a nice thing. Great way to start the day. Are we done sentencing the Proud Boys, or are there more of them? I don't really know. We'll have to check in on the reporting on that and find out what's going on. But yeah, a recommended sentence of 22 years, which still isn't enough, and I think is still, I don't know, in this case, how much prosecutors were asking for. But the numbers do keep going up, and these are longer than, I don't know, something longer the sentences than others are getting for participating in the same events. But of course, they did much more to precipitate these events, and these are still coming in under the, I think under the sentencing guidelines. 33 years, is that right? I thought 20, Greg says 33 years. I thought I had seen 22 the other day, unless maybe you just had a hiccup while you were trying to type 22 and your finger jumped over and did 33. 33 years would be even better, of course, or is that what they were asking for? 33 and this one-liner thing with a 15-second delay isn't necessarily the greatest. But okay, 33 years, he says, is what they asked for. 22 years is what they got. I suppose that's supposed to be some kind of a compromise. Everybody loves repeating the same number over and over again. I mean, 111 years would have been okay with me. That would have been fine. So, okay, it's good news. The Proud Boys are getting some of what they deserve. Some of them probably deserve longer sentences. More of them deserve sentences. And yes, as Justice points out, this was a MAGA judge. This was a Trump judge. So, you know, I don't know exactly what kind of grain of salt to take that with. I mean, you'd think that we're all conditioned to believe that Trump judges would just say, all right, 6 months, and just let them go with that. So, it is something that the judge is shaving a third off of what the prosecution was asking for. That's nothing to sneeze at. But it is still 22 years. And so, you know, we're having a little difficult to read this whole situation. But like I said, there's plenty to catch up on, plenty of other things happening in the courts. I'm liking the idea that they're going to prison. I think for the Proud Boys, as I was saying yesterday, it should be less Fred Perry, more Fed Penny, if you ask me. Go to jail, go directly to jail. Let's do it. Let's get it over with. Of course, they'll be, I'm sure, appealing and staying out, pending appeal, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, others are pointing out, well, it is interesting that the one brown guy mixed up in all of this gets the longest sentence. But that's not inconsistent with the way the Trump world works either. Like, you're not part of the team. They'll use you as necessary. And then when it comes time to hand out jail sentences, you'll likely get the longest one going. Okay, the phone is ringing. I've made enough, probably enough errors or wandered into the margins far enough that Greg feels it's time to step in, and I'm happy to have him do it too. Because oh look, after you read Enrique Tarrio sentenced to several decades in prison, you kind of put the paper down and say, you know, I mean, it's like, now it's time to, I don't know, have tea, whiskey, a pipe. Put my feet up, call for my pipe, and call for my bowl. And if I had Fiddlers 3, I absolutely would have asked them to join in as well. It was a good night. Okay. Well, now, good morning, Greg. How are you?
Good morning. How are you? If you don't have a pipe to fill, you could, you could always order gummies online.
Sure, that's true. I don't know what kind of gummies you'll get.
Well, Cheech and Chong makes them.
Oh, okay, right. Yeah, like don't share them with the kids. Although the Republicans say you're going to give them out at Halloween anyway. So
yeah. So I was following Brandy Bookman's reporting step by step
the way
yesterday.
To do it.
It's a federal court, so there's no media allowed. But she was explaining what was going on, and it was actually pretty interesting. Yes, the judge is a Trump judge. However,
I mean, yeah.
The main thing about that is that even though they do it, it's very difficult to make the case that this was a deep state they wanted to get Tarrio and Trump and everybody associated with him because it was a Trump judge. But what happened is that as the prosecutors were making their case, and then as Tarrio's family was making his case, and then as Tarrio was making his case all before the sentencing, the judge said, I heard all of that. You say you're remorseful. Dominique Pizzola saying Trump won has nothing to do with what I'm going to do here.
Oh, yes. That was the
you have lots of complaints, and your lawyer at least is trying to relitigate the trial. That's not how it works. The jury found that you were guilty, so that's settled. And you can't add, well, I want to relitigate it because I did this and I did that. You're guilty. That's what the judge said.
All right, that seems
so
like
given
law and order-ish.
Given the fact that you're guilty, we have to add up all the stuff that's here. I will, I will allow extra time for, this seditious terrorism type of stuff. I'll let that be tacked on. And so when I add it up and I go through all the guidelines, that comes to 33 years. Okay. But I'm not giving you 33 years. I'm giving you 22 years. Now, that's longer than anybody else I gave. And even though you weren't there, you clearly did all of this, and you don't show remorse, and you're responsible, and what you did is terrible. I mean, this is a Trump judge saying all of this.
Yes.
And it's real, and you're guilty, and that's simply not to be debated. It is a matter of fact, all of these things. And what's especially awful is that you did this against the United States of America. So that is settled.
Okay.
Very nice to hear from a Trump judge. And then what he said is the reason I'm not giving you the full 33 years is I went through all the different case law, examples, precedents, and basically people who get 30 years, 33 years are folks who, did like the Oklahoma bombing and went in there with the intent to kill the people that they were, committing crimes against. Okay. I don't see any evidence here that you went in there deliberately intending to kill people. I don't see that. So I'm not giving you the full sentence, but I'm giving you a lot.
Yeah.
And 22 years is a long time. Had you gone in there trying to kill Mike Pence or Nancy Pelosi and we had evidence for it and the jury found you guilty of that, then you're getting 33.
Yeah. I mean, what they have is, of course, he was there. Well, he wasn't there.
He wasn't
but
there.
Other people were there, and other people who may or may not have been Proud Boys or near Proud Boys said things that led people to believe that could be the outcome.
But that's their trial, not his trial. So you couldn't necessarily prove that he told them to go kill people. That's what the judge said. Again, I'm not relitigating the case. The guy's clearly guilty, and the judge said, had I had evidence that you were trying to kill people, you would have gotten the full throw the book at him. But, since you didn't quite have that, I'm going to give you what I think is appropriate. And you know what? 2 decades and more is a lot. Yeah. If you have to spend 22 years in prison with the snitch label on you, that's a lot of time.
Okay. Yeah, all right. And lots of things can happen. Surely he's hoping he'll be pardoned in the next Trump administration if there is one.
Joe Biggs in particular thinks he's going to be pardoned. And I'm sure Dominique Pizzola, who thinks Trump won, thinks he's going to be
prison's pardoned. Weird. You could get stabbed. Things could happen. So, whatever. I don't know. Don't bank on it. I mean, it's a great thing to hope for, I suppose, if it keeps you going from day to day. Do what you like.
It'll take a while, and that while, is while you're there. And by the way, Trump has a habit of throwing everybody under the bus anyway, especially if he needs to save himself. So I wouldn't count on it. But nonetheless, that's the situation. And when you hear 22 years, you might think he should have gotten more. Maybe he should. But that's the law, and that's the way the judge decided it.
Okay.
And judges have a lot of discretion. You can complain about judges, people do, but they have a lot of discretion.
Yes. All right. Well, thanks for exercising your discretion there. Trumpy judge, I guess he was looking to stay out of the Eileen Cannon spotlight.
Yeah, he was nowhere near that spotlight. He didn't go easy on them in any sense.
Yeah.
He did what he thought was right.
Okay.
You may disagree with his judgment, but it seems pretty straightforward. And he showed his work. He explained every step on what he was doing and why.
That's the important part. Every once in a while, you run into somebody who, they support Trump and they want to be a judge, and they want to be a judge for traditional judgy reasons. And they get to be a judge and they say, maybe I'll take this seriously. It'd be
Now,
fantastic.
the other thing that people brought up about this judge.
Or he's biding his time for some other surprise.
Well, but that's the thing,
Yeah.
okay? He
Is it?
essentially said, I have decided I'm not going any further up the ladder than where I am right now. Because no Democrat is going to elevate him. And after this decision, no Republican is going to elevate him.
Right. That's true. But then again,
And so that
it's a
was clear to
lifetime
him
appointment.
when he did this.
Okay. I mean, it's ironic, or ironic. It's not ironic. It's unusual that other judges don't feel that way. Like, here's your lifetime appointment. I want another one. Well, be happy with what you got.
Yeah. I want a promotion. I've been here
But they
3
all
weeks.
do. Right. Yeah. I mean, after at a certain level, I assume it dawns on you. Like, it's amazing that I got to be a judge. I'm really not going to make it to the Supreme Court.
And some of the lawyers have pointed out, again, this is not stuff I know, but it's stuff they know. They say, those openings don't come up all that often. Relatively speaking.
Higher courts. Yeah.
I
guess
mean,
that's
if you're
true.
there on this
Plus they get
particular
filibustered.
court and you think you're getting a promotion, you're going to have to wait anyway.
Yes. And you might even get that promotion and still have to wait a long time, a year or more, until somebody decides to give you a hearing, yada, yada. Then they find out that...
But this guy knew that this was like
chugged too
end
much
of line.
beer.
It's like most people outside of, I don't know, Rudy Giuliani, realize that once you're mayor of New York, you're not going anywhere. It's a dead-end job, as my dad told me back in the 60s. And I said, why? And he said, because you cannot possibly satisfy everybody.
Yeah, and that's certainly in the spotlight. You see, everyone can see that you're not satisfying everybody. Yeah, well, so for some people, being mayor of New York would be just fine. Others,
John Lindsay learned that lesson. Rudy Giuliani learned that lesson.
After a while.
It just doesn't work that way.
Right. You can move into landscaping or hair design. But the presidency is out of reach for you.
Right. So other things that happened, court related.
Eric. Yeah.
And, there was a fire hose of news now that Labor Day has passed.
Yeah, it was sucking up all the news somehow.
On the other hand, the Senate's back, but the House isn't. So there's a lot coming there. Maybe we'll talk about that later, or you talked about it with Joan yesterday.
Yeah.
But the Senate and House are a mess. The Senate is far less of a mess than the House, even with Mitch McConnell's situation.
Yes. Well, we run the Senate, so, and by we, I mean...
the Senate Republicans agree with the Senate Democrats that, as far as anything possible, they're happy to jam the House and screw Kevin McCarthy. It's really kind of interesting.
They've always been interested in jamming the other side.
They're especially
Their
interested
House.
in it on Ukraine funding.
Yeah.
Because McCarthy,
He's crazy.
is held up by his radicals. And Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer both said, no, this is happening. And too bad for you. We're looking forward to jamming you.
Okay. Well, I can appreciate that. And they might want to bring up his record of
Could
totally
you briefly
misunderstanding
explain what
Ukraine.
jamming is?
You mean like just forcing their hand?
Forcing their hand.
Yeah. Usually, essentially, right? The bicameralism, the bills have to pass both houses, and they each try to exercise leverage over the other. But generally speaking, the House has had to succumb to what the Senate wanted, because the Senate can always lean on the filibuster and just say, we just can't get this thing passed.
Right.
Which is part of the reason they don't want to give up the filibuster, is they can leverage it against the House.
Right. So my amateur dilettante way of looking at this is the House goes first and the Senate wins.
Yeah, very often. the House can sometimes leverage it on various fiscal bills because they can point to the Constitution and say, it says here that all the bills are supposed to originate here. And that's where the Senate says, all right, well, we'll just
you go first,
second.
then we'll win.
Right. We can go first, and sometimes the Senate will go first on things, usually not those financial bills, but something else, and then just say, take what you can get. They wait until the end of the session or right up against a recess or something and just say, given the filibuster situation, what we got passed is all there is. Take it or leave it. And the bill just dies if you don't do it in the next week. That's another fun way.
So other things that happen in a legal sense, at least at federal level, is a federal court struck down Alabama's remedial congressional redistricting map that had defied prior court order. The court said, I'm sick and tired of telling you to go back and rewrite it. You're not rewriting it. You know what? Special master. We'll rewrite it for you. So that's a +1 Democratic seat. You were told that you have to have 2 black districts, Voting Rights Act and all of that. And you gave us like 17 versions of one because you couldn't decide which of your own people you were going to cut. So we'll do it for you.
Yeah. Okay.
And to be fair and look at it in the rosiest possible light, it's not so much that they wanted to discriminate against black voters. They simply didn't want to eliminate any of the seats they already had, and they couldn't decide how to do that.
Okay.
Now, it's probably that they also didn't want to have black voters. If they could, they would have had 0 black districts. But, that's the best way of looking at it. So that's interesting. Rule of law, once again, prevails. Not always, as we'll see when we get to one of our more important sections about and segments about Wisconsin. But that happened. Also on the legal front, Jack Smith isn't done. CNN was reporting special counsel election probe continues with focus on fundraising and voting equipment breaches. In other words, Sidney Powell, released the Kraken, is in the middle of this, and Jack Smith is focusing on how money raised off of baseless claims of voter fraud was used to fund attempts to breach voting equipment in several states won by Joe Biden. And again, this gets to the nature of what he's doing versus what Fani Willis is doing. Willis tells the whole complete story, which is really useful for us. And Smith hones in on the individual specifics. He's going after Trump separately, not as part of the RICO thing. So that'll help for speed. But he's not done, and he may well focus on Sidney Powell for essentially wire fraud.
Well, all right. That's what it was.
She's trying to raise money for bogus things based on bogus claims about the election, using the money to pay people to steal voting equipment information.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, a nice, tight package that really doesn't involve a whole lot of other people. So, he's got unindicted co-conspirators, but you may get them one by one.
Yeah, they may be indicted for maybe even for different conspiracies or certainly for other activities. It's an interesting and alternative, powerful alternative approach, which is helped immensely by the fact that Fani Willis has explained already what everybody is doing. Well, why is Jack Smith pursuing this other one? Well, we actually know this story. We knew it beforehand.
Right. That's why they're so complementary.
Yeah.
And so you've got the legal issues. Well, how fast can Fani Willis do a trial? And what about severance for the other people and this, that, and everything else? But then you have the court of public opinion where essentially Fani Willis is telling the whole big story. Jack Smith adds these pieces and the public goes, oh, I get it. I understand. Yeah. I already read the synopsis and now I'm seeing the individual chapters.
Right. So it's complementary work for those who think that it will have no chance of working down in Georgia. Well, wait and see. Sometimes people beat out the throw on a sacrifice bunt. And you end up with an extra runner on base and a run batted in. So, hey, you never know. And sometimes things just work out differently than you think. And Georgia's RICO statute, apparently, we learned a little bit about it, and it's not like the federal one. And sometimes it can be abused. That's making the news, too.
Right.
But look, it's on the books, and if you want to, as they always say, enforce the laws that are already on the books. We don't need more. Okay, we'll use this one. It'll just be against Trump. I didn't mean that. I meant use it against other people. What's wrong with
So one of the people that Jack Smith is interviewing to get to the bottom of what Sidney Powell was doing and whether or not what she was doing was legal is Bernie Kerik.
Oh, what does he know about what's legal and what's not?
Well, he spoke at length about how Trump allies access voting systems in Antrim County, Michigan. And he also discussed the origins of the theory that voting machines could switch votes from one candidate to another.
His brain.
And he also acknowledged the breach of voting systems in Coffee County, remember, one of the breakfast counties in Georgia, during his interview with federal prosecutors.
Okay.
And, they call the breakfast counties because of their names.
Yeah.
Cook County. And,
is it Cook? All right.
And Make Me Some Bacon County.
Right.
That sort of thing.
Cornflakes County.
The point I'm trying to make is that where Bernie Kerik goes, Rudy Giuliani cannot be far behind.
Okay.
Kerik isn't a free agent. He does what his master tells him to do.
That's true. And what happened to limiting the career after being New York mayor? It should be even less for the police commissioner. But apparently he's dining out for breakfast in Georgia over and over on this.
Right. And then yet another legal thing that's come up, and I don't particularly have this story in front of me, but there was a partially screened, partially revealed extra docket item, whatever they are called, which essentially implies that Jack Smith has asked Judge Chutkan to do something about Trump's talking about all this indictment stuff because he's tainting juries. We don't really know what that is because Trump's lawyers then complained that should have been under seal. And Jack Smith said, no, we told you we were doing this. Oh. And here's the data for that, and we'll turn this over to the judge, and the judge will decide. So there's more coming on that. In other words, Jack Smith's not done. He's not just sitting back waiting for the trial date.
All right.
The grand jury is continuing to churn away and do stuff, and so is the judge. And, it's getting closer and closer to when things have to be decided. For example, today is September 6th.
You're right.
Today is the day, I think, that after getting themselves turned in and fingerprinted and mugshotted, today is the day that everybody was supposed to show up for arraignment because in Georgia it's separate from the mugshots and fingerprints.
Yes,
everybody already has. I think they all came in by Zoom and said we're not guilty.
Okay.
But the point is, the federal judge, Steve Jones, had said to Mark Meadows, listen, you have this case here where you're trying to move it to federal court, and I'm going to rule on this as expeditiously as possible. But if I haven't done it by September 6th, you got to turn yourself in and get arrested and all the other stuff and just assume that you're in Georgia. And that's today. So does that mean that Steve Jones is going to rule today? We have no idea when the judge is going to do this, but he's taking his time in this very strange, unusual, one-of-a-kind case to make sure he gets it right, because whatever he does is certainly going to be appealed. And so we're going to hear from him soon, but, could be as soon as today.
All right. Well, we'll all wait anxiously in the various breakfast counties. Fruity Pebbles County, I believe, is where he sits.
Yeah.
And this is what makes it so interesting. So I guess, now they all have to turn themselves in by this date. Now, he could still take his time afterwards. I think he's working hard to do it quickly.
Yeah, but remember, Meadows wants to move it to Captain Crunch County because the jury pool is much bigger. But there's three things about moving the case to the federal level. A bigger jury pool, which includes non-Atlanta folks, Fulton County folks, and therefore possibly more favorable to Trump and company.
Right.
Number two, no cameras. And number three, a federal motion which would immediately follow to dismiss the case altogether for reasons of sovereign rule of the federal government or some such legal nonsense.
Oh, okay. Right. Well, you have to make it part of
Can't
a complete
do that in state
breakfast.
court. You have to do it in federal court. So you got to move to federal court so you can make that motion.
Yeah. But then again, right. So we have yet to hear from the federal courts whether they will close the doors on them and say, you're just not entitled to federal jurisdiction on this one. There's already a federal case. It's happening in Washington, D.C. There's no reason to have one in Georgia.
Yeah, what are you going to do? Make a federal case out of it? Actually, yes.
To try, anyhow. So, all right, time being wasted in Georgia and lawyers being paid by defendants we would like to see impoverished.
Right.
Okay.
So that's most of the legal news, at least at the federal level. And I think I want to save this for after the break. But after the break, we're going to talk a little bit about Wisconsin, what's going on at state level that involves their Supreme Court, because I think it's sort of important.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, let's just throw out a couple of things here. Amar Musa is a spokesperson for the Biden administration, says, in case you were wondering why Republicans are increasingly throwing spaghetti at the wall to attack President Biden, Goldman Sachs says we have further reduced our 12-month U.S. recession probability back to 15% from 20%. This change reflects continued encouraging inflation news. In fact, the economic news has been pretty good. And so we have this odd situation where Jim Messina is the one who says this. We have our usual Democratic bedwetters worried about Biden. You shouldn't. It's not that things are clear, but we do know a whole bunch of stuff is going on, including the fact that there isn't going to be a challenge. So all of the never-Trumpers like Bill Kristol saying, why don't we have somebody else run? That's not happening. As an aside, they're saying that because they're worried Biden will die, and then we have Kamala Harris, and they don't want a black woman as president. That's why the never-Trumpers are doing this. So unlike
their business.
It was very much like when Doug Shane and Pat Goodell said, after one term, Obama should do the country a service and step down.
And it's always...
He had a wonderful term. Now
Democrats.
Why don't you turn the reins over to the white guy?
Okay. And now they want to get rid of that white guy, too.
Yeah, well, now they want to get rid... but they're afraid to. Because if you get rid of the white guy, then you're going to have the black lady. So what they're saying is some other white person should run instead of Biden.
Yeah, sure. Well, and make sure.
Yeah, sure, right.
Bring
Okay.
a white person with them.
Thank you for your service. Why don't you keep doing your Never Trump stuff?
Yeah, okay. Well, I don't want to see what Never Trumpers' business is here in the Democratic Party exactly. I think they have things to take care of at home. The fact that they couldn't get it done doesn't mean we're inviting you to do it here in our party. So get lost. Go have breakfast. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Net Roots Radio. Let's do some more news things. I bet you have something else other than what we already spoke about.
Well, I do.
I know it.
So I was looking at the Rhode Island results in the Democratic primary there for the 1st Congressional District. That's the one where David Cicilline was the Democratic representative. He stepped down. What happens in Rhode Island typically is if the Democrat wins the primary, they win the general election. And the primary was very crowded with a bunch of people with various controversies. And the person who won was former White House aide Gabe Amo, I believe is Amo. Amo.
Not
Could
AMMO.
become the first person of color to represent Rhode Island in Congress ever.
I see. Because I thought maybe they were trying to appeal to Republicans. My name is Ammo.
Yeah.
Oh,
maybe.
Try that.
But the thing is, he's associated with Joe Biden.
What?
And part of the reason he
the
won
successful president of the United
is
States?
The Democratic Socialists of America and the leftist group in Rhode Island, which is fairly militant as the whole, on the whole, couldn't really agree on who to back. And there were some more progressive people in the primary, and they didn't rally around him.
There were several?
There was
and they couldn't rally around any of them?
In fact, the most progressive one, they actually took the stance of we're not endorsing him.
Okay. I would have spun it that way.
Even though
there are 6 of them and we're splitting our support
AOC
evenly.
endorsed them. It was just really weird. And basically what they're saying is, I get that Bernie and AOC endorsed them, but that's not good enough.
Good for them. They're very independent.
Yeah. So, as one person put it, who is a Rhode Island activist, these people yell a lot, but they never really do anything.
Well, they're not very heavily empowered in Rhode Island. There's a very hardcore establishment Democratic
thing
Party
here,
there.
and that is the whole issue of if you're, let's say, to the left of Joe Biden, who's the most progressive president we've ever had.
You could be there.
If you're to the left of Joe Biden, which is possible.
Sure.
The question is, do you cooperate with the Democratic Party and get the most progressive person that you possibly can who's electable?
Yes,
or
really?
Do you just say, no, not good enough, and then I'm not working with the Democratic Party? And this became an issue when Bernie Sanders came close to winning the nomination, however close he came. Yeah. And you had somebody who was considered a democratic socialist.
Yeah.
And so his time is come and gone. Bernie's not going to be the nominee. And so what do you do now? And they're struggling with this, do we have a toehold of respectability in the party? What do we do with it? Do we abandon it and go back to being in the wilderness completely? Yes. Or do we cooperate?
Oh, well, you could squander it actively.
It's not an issue for me because I'm not there with them. But I'm just saying, they're struggling with this. And good luck to them. To me, it's a big tent, and basically you hold your nose and you vote for the most progressive that could win. But that's not how a lot of them think. And so
that's what the primary is for.
We saw it in the primary here. And so what you have is a Biden-associated guy winning.
That is now the most
he'll
progressive.
Be the next representative.
Yeah. Well, now he's the most progressive guy in the race. So you know what to do.
So you know what to do.
Support him half-heartedly, I guess. But support him. I mean, if you pull the lever, that's all the heart you need, but you got to get it to do it.
Which lends itself to the next discussion about the whole picture about Joe Biden and saying, well, here's Bret Stephens writing why people are abandoning Joe Biden, and of course he gives all the reasons Republicans are.
Is bed bugs the reason?
Yeah, immigrants, and he hasn't secured the border. And the price of eggs.
But that sounds like people who aren't abandoning
too much crime.
It's people who are never there.
Too much crime and the border? Come on. What are you, a Republican? Oh, yes, you are.
That's the answer. Right, exactly. I'm abandoning the Titanic. Never on it, but believe me, I'm not getting on now.
Right. So, there's a lot of that going on. It's a lot of hand-wringing because the Wall Street Journal poll showed that Democrats and Republicans are tied.
Oh, to what?
They're tied to each other.
With each, I see. All right, yeah.
They're like Biden and Trump are running neck and neck, and how can that be?
Sure
Trump is so terrible. And, look, there's a different point of view in the country. We know that. The country's divided and very partisan. We know that. Whoever the Republicans run, whoever the Democrats run, it's going to be a close race because the country is divided. And so welcome to reality. Now, what do you do with that information? It doesn't mean Biden is lost. You have a lot of people who don't think Biden is the very best president ever, and besides, he's old. Yeah, so what are you going to do? Well, I guess I'll vote for him if it's, compared to Trump. And so, yes, and that's how he won in 2020, and likely how he'll win in 2024. Mm-hmm. But, you've got at least a year before then, so you have to hand wring. You've got 14 months to fret, so you've got to fret because why isn't it 70 point? Well, that's just not reality. Mm-hmm. Well, why aren't Republicans abandoning Trump? Because they're tribal. and they don't want to abandon their white Christian identity. And why aren't the Democrats rallying around Biden more? Because they don't 14 months out. They never do.
Yeah.
Ever.
Okay.
Why would you expect them to do it now? If you go down and take a look at all the different campaigns, 14 months out, most of the polls were wrong about who actually won, or at least the margin.
But they didn't matter. We kept saying that they didn't matter at that point.
Yes, and that's one of the reasons why we're saying it doesn't matter. So we have that.
Right. Okay.
On the other hand, Republicans are continuing to prove that they are, in fact, the radicals that Democrats say they are, and eventually the normies, the independents who decide elections, are going to get that. For example, here's I'll give you two examples, one bigger than the other. Here's the small one. Rolling Stone reports it inside Marjorie Taylor Greene and Carrie Lake's death race to become Trump's VP.
Yeah, I saw that article.
His allies say they'd be stupid choices, but Trump has repeatedly discussed with senior staffers MTG and Carrie Lake as potential number twos. So, of course, it would be stupid, but he might well do it anyway because it's Trump and he does stupid things.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know in the end how you quantify exactly how much Sarah Palin hurt John McCain. And I don't know how you would quantify just how much Marjorie Taylor Greene or Carrie Lake would hurt Donald Trump's chances of being reelected.
100.
It's real.
Yeah, it sure is. I wonder which one would be more damaging.
I think that Marjorie Taylor Greene would be more damaging. I think Carrie Lake is a lot slicker.
She may be, and also she's not. I don't know if she's got the national reputation that Marjorie Taylor Greene has gotten, but she could easily get it. She would get it immediately by
She's
running.
not as stupid. She's
That's
not
true.
Say stuff like space lasers and stuff like that.
Yeah. Although I mean,
she's not. She's very slick.
Not
She's been on
accidentally.
TV. She's a practiced,
that's
area, local, regional TV figure.
News type person. Yeah, I mean, she knows how to read a script, and that's good, and it means something when you're making.
It's
speeches.
a different kind of performance. She performs as a leader,
I can see
and
that.
Marjorie Taylor Greene performs as a wrestler.
True. The only weird thing about it is that it might occur to her or to her staff that Trump wants to hear a space laser story, in which case she will provide it. She won't shy away from it.
Yeah, but she'll do it privately.
But maybe. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess if somebody tells her it will work with the base and they got to hear it and that's part of the audition, she'll do it publicly too. Whereas, but a murdery traitor there will do it for free and without prompting. She's exactly a true believer. So yeah, I guess she would be probably more damaging. Awesome. Well, I don't really want to go through that actually.
Right. I really don't either. So the story I wanted to talk about is what's going on in Wisconsin.
All right.
You may well know Janet Protasiewicz, and we spent a lot of time trying to get her elected and learning how to pronounce her name.
Yes.
Was finally elected and gave the Supreme Court in Wisconsin a 4-3 Democratic majority, liberal majority.
We can say
they say they're nonpartisan, but that's of course a lie.
Oh, right. Okay.
We know that because the Republican chief judge and one of the Republican associate judges have been blasting the Democrat Party in their opinions, in the written opinions.
What?
About what the court can or cannot do or might go in the future, and bitterly complaining on social media about how the Democrat Party is ruining the court and so on and so forth. So we know that that's like old news already.
Terrible.
Today, I have two stories, one worse than the other. To give you an idea where this is going, I want to talk about that a little bit. This one is from the AP. Complaints over campaign comments by Wisconsin Supreme Court justice are dismissed. The state judiciary disciplinary panel has rejected several complaints lodged against Wisconsin Supreme Court Justice Janet Protasiewicz that allege she violated the Judicial Code of Ethics for comments she made during the campaign. It's a setback to Republicans who argued these remarks could warrant impeachment.
No. Well.
And that's really the key thing here. Protasiewicz on Tuesday released a letter from the Wisconsin Judicial Commission informing her that several complaints regarding comments she made had been dismissed without action. The commission's actions are private unless released by one of the parties involved, and Protasiewicz received permission from the commission to release its May 31st letter to her, which he then provided to the Associated Press, which is where the story is. Protasiewicz's win in April flipped majority control of Wisconsin Supreme Court from conservative to liberal for the first time in 15 years. Democrats heavily backed her, during which Protasiewicz criticized Republican-drawn electoral maps and spoke in favor of abortion rights. Now, the Republicans on the Supreme Court there, supposedly nonpartisan, talk about abortion being the Holocaust all the time. They don't recuse themselves from abortion issues. They don't think they have to. And they don't, because in Wisconsin, it's really been decided that having a personal view of something is having a personal view of something, period, end of discussion. But not for Republicans, because they're really upset that Protasiewicz may wind up ruling on a state redistricting situation where the state redistricting is challenged as being illegal and rigged. Oh, no. We know Protasiewicz thinks that because she said so. And that would mean the end of the rigging of the vote, so that, as now, the Republicans have a two-thirds majority in the Assembly, and they have one short of a two-thirds majority in the state Senate. They want to keep their power.
Sure, of course.
They're very upset that Democrats may take it from them by being fair.
Right. They may actually win more votes than they do or whatever, you know. Those
there's a Democratic governor, one of two Democratic senators. The Democrats won the state for the presidential race, and Republicans have two-thirds control in the state Senate and Assembly. And why is that? Because they rigged it. That's why.
Reasons.
So that comment of setting up what's going on and the power struggle that's going on there is followed by this New York Times report this morning: why Republicans could impeach a liberal judge before she's heard a case. Republicans in Wisconsin have floated impeaching a newly seated liberal state Supreme Court justice who's threatening conservatives' grip on state politics. Very nice story. Republicans in Washington are coalescing around the prospect of impeaching a newly seated liberal justice. In other words, they're serious about this and they may go ahead and do it.
As serious as impeaching somebody who hasn't done anything yet could be. Which they're trying to do with the president.
That's what Republicans do. See Joe Biden.
Yeah,
we'll get to that in a little bit. But, you know, the drama over Republican threats to impeach and possibly remove Protasiewicz could raise new questions about democracy and legitimacy of elections in a state where GOP lawmakers and their allies spent 2 years disputing the 2020 presidential contest outcome. For Republicans, a liberal Supreme Court majority serves as an existential danger. If the court, as expected, invalidates Wisconsin's legislative maps, it would strip Republicans of what now amounts to permanent majorities in the legislature. But removing a newly elected justice could prompt a backlash in 2024 from Democrats and moderate Republican voters who abandoned the GOP during the Trump years. So the Republicans have to decide, in effect, how far do they want to push this. Here's where some of the mechanics and process comes in. And I don't fully understand this, so, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, you out there listening to me. But it works something like this. If the Republicans decide that they want to impeach Protasiewicz, they need to do it for cause, because that would be done with a bare majority in the Assembly, the equivalent of the House of Representatives. And for cause means you have to do something according to the Wisconsin Constitution, like, crimes.
That doesn't mean that they can say, why did you impeach her? Cause.
Yeah, you have to show cause.
All right.
Cause.
You have to appear before a judge in the morning and show cause.
Because I wanted to.
Yeah.
So they're trying to use the pretext of her being unfair about prejudging this legislative lines, case that comes up.
Right. Oh,
and the problem
is,
that
terrible.
as the AP said, well, she was just cleared of that. So they can't use that as a pretext easily, but they might do it anyway.
Sure, why not?
And if they do,
what the hell?
Then she would need to be convicted by 2/3 of the Senate. Which likely won't happen because they're one short of 2/3, and a lot of Republicans in both houses don't really like the idea of doing this because they're afraid of retribution by the Democrats in 2024. They've already lost a bunch of elections, and they see the writing on the wall. So they're struggling with what to do. If they go ahead and impeach her, let's turn for a moment to a different state where there's an impeachment trial going on of a elected public official.
Okay.
And that would be Texas.
Right.
And Ken Paxton. And that trial started yesterday.
Well, good day for it.
But my point is Ken Paxton currently the acting Attorney General? The answer is no.
No, he's
and
not.
The reason he's not is because once the House decided to impeach him in Texas, he was suspended from his job until such time as this is adjudicated.
That's a pretty good rule.
But that would happen to Protasewicz. My point is, if they wind up impeaching her, she's out of a job until they adjudicate it.
Oh, okay.
And what if they don't?
Oh, ever.
Nobody's forcing them to.
That's interesting.
So now you have a 3-3 Supreme Court, which means that, like nothing gets done.
Yeah. Huh. That's not great.
That's not great. Okay. So yes, it's true that if she is fully impeached, Tony Evers could replace her with a liberal. So what's the point? But what if they impeach her but don't try her?
What if they impeach her and don't try her and Tony Evans replaces her with her?
Can't.
Says
so
who?
I mean, basically,
Right, her
everything is
husband.
stuck in limbo. Or
Her dog.
Or they impeach her, they try her, they convict her.
Yeah. Oh, well.
And they do it before December 1st, in which case Tony Evers appoints a replacement subject to another election. And it's likely, given the Republican majorities in the House and Assembly and the Senate, that special election would take place on the day of the GOP primary to make sure that GOP voters are the ones who are actually coming to the polls. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff here that's going on that's pure power play, power grab by Republicans. But it's so, as we like to say in the trade, it's so naked.
Yeah. Like
that, it's
a minute ago we were hearing about the Republicans who are nervous about this and who think it's a political loser to go ahead with a baseless
Well, that's why
presumably
there may be 2/3 Republicans in the Assembly, but it only takes a majority to impeach. So you could lose a third of them and still get this done.
Yeah. But yeah, I assume that the people who are afraid of the idea of a baseless impeachment might also be upset and afraid about the idea of we're not even going to seriously try her for the impeachment.
Well, let's just say that the Republican plan is not without risk for them.
Okay. But
on the other hand, they're radicals. That doesn't mean they won't do it.
Maybe. All right.
January 6th was a little risky, but guess what?
They did try to do it. It will be impeached.
The House Republicans
will be
in
wild.
The national sense.
Yeah.
And let me give you Heidi Prespola, who used to be at NBC and now is, where is she? She's somewhere else. Politico.
Hawaii. Oh, I don't know. Politico.
For folks who primarily consume right-wing media, she writes, funded by billionaires, let me help on the Hunter issue about what's not been proven. Number one, the committee's not found any direct evidence that President Biden personally benefited from any of his son's business dealings. Number two, this follows a 5 years long investigation by a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney that failed to produce any evidence, and a report released by Senate Republicans that found Hunter Biden's role awkward and problematic, but provides no new evidence and found no instance of policy being altered as a result of his role. That's a quote. Republican Ron Johnson, who led the investigation as chair of the Homeland Security Committee, had openly said he hoped the election year probe would hurt the Democratic nominee. No explanation why there's no investigation of Kushner. So that's the background for all of this. My point is that the Republicans do not have any basis for starting an impeachment inquiry, and they probably won't start an impeachment inquiry because there's enough Republicans who are skittish about it, like there's 18 Republicans in Biden won districts, for example. But they could still go ahead and have an impeachment vote without an inquiry because there's no rule that says it can't be otherwise. And so my point is there's no reason for it, and it doesn't make any sense, and you have skittish Republicans, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense politically, and they may well do it anyway.
Well, yeah, although I do think I like the curveball of the suspension from the job. That doesn't happen with the president of the United States, of course. So there's no
because if you did, you'd have
reason to
Kamala
try.
Harris, and that's what they fear more than anything
there's
else.
that, but also, yeah, I mean, there would be, constitutional chaos. I think the framers were probably wise in saying that at least for the president of the United States, commander in chief of the armed forces, et cetera, you can't just suspend him from his job on a majority vote of the House of Representatives. But I guess you can do that in the states, and different situation. And it would be very interesting to see whether they decide to just risk it and say, well, what's so wrong with having a tied Supreme Court anyway?
So what I'm trying to say here, if you step back and look at the big picture, is that, yeah, Biden and Trump may be tied at the moment in polls that really don't tell you what's going to go on 14 months from now.
Yes.
But the idea that Trump indictments, trials, and radicalization will make no difference, I don't think that's true, and that's particularly so when Republicans appear to be insisting on proving they really are radical.
Yeah.
As we go along, both with impeachments at the national level and at the Wisconsin state level, and by the way, at the Texas level.
Yeah. I mean, it can't help their narrative. It can help them among their base, but in an election in which Democratic turnout is likely to be rather supercharged, as we keep hearing, over abortion issues and others, and the issue of saving democracy, et cetera, to suspend a Supreme Court justice for no particular reason and to suspend them indefinitely up on top of let's not have any service chiefs in any of the armed forces, and let's never have a hearing for Merrick Garland, and it's beginning to feel like they're compiling a record of, let's say, shenanigans that might not help them.
Right.
Well, it does help them, but long term, it could be the sort of thing that, I don't know, half of America could be very much outraged about. We'll see what happens.
Right. So, as this article in the Times says, looking at Protasewicz, the Republican Party beyond Wisconsin seeking to use impeachment as a first line of defense against Democratic officials in Georgia. Republican legislators want to impeach Fani Willis. Not going to happen because Brian Kemp says it's not going to happen. In Washington, some House Republicans are pushing to impeach President Biden. That would be, for example, Donald Trump's candidate choice for vice president. Wisconsin leading Republicans have not been subtle about their intentions. Robin Vos, the powerful Assembly Speaker, has twice in recent weeks raised the possibility of impeachment. And that would be pretty interesting if, in fact, that happened.
And down in Florida, of course, Ron DeSantis keeps suspending county prosecutors, Democrats, if I recall correctly. And by the way, that's happening in Georgia, too, even though Kemp says it won't happen with respect to Fani Willis. The legislature has replaced, I think, more localized Democrats. County boards of elections have been suspended. Yeah, I mean, throw that all in there with the book banning and throwing out of AP courses in Florida, et cetera, et cetera. It is beginning to look like they don't particularly care about it. Interesting for the law and order party. No laws for us.
And let me just add, and again, as the New York Times says, Wisconsin Democrats are pretty convinced Republicans are going to do this.
I can believe it. The more I think about it, the more it seems like an inevitability. I mean, they're going to be able to grab partisan advantage in something that they think the rest of the country won't pay any attention to because it's Wisconsin, her name is funny.
Yeah, I think they're wrong about that. I think a lot of people are going to start paying attention as of now. See New York Times report.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and probably they ought to pass around. If logic has anything to do with it, and it might not, you might want to tell the Wisconsin Republicans who think it's a backwater thing, no one's going to pay attention to it. The level of attention and at least momentary fame brought to the three Democrats chucked off the floor and nearly two out of the three kicked out of the state assembly in Tennessee.
Yep.
doesn't bode well. And I mean, Wisconsin, we're kind of been.
Yeah, what's the difference? What's the difference between Wisconsin, Tennessee, and Marjorie Taylor Greene?
I don't know. Is this a joke? It sounds like a good one. They all walk into a bar.
A rabbi, a priest, and a pastor walk into a bar.
Exactly.
And the bartender
there's
says,
no
"What
reason.
is this? Some kind of a joke?"
And it's not like we're not focused on Wisconsin. There's lots of attention on Wisconsin. There's lots of very skilled Democratic operatives who've been working very hard to reverse things in Wisconsin and have had tremendous success. And
which is why the Republicans are doing it.
Yeah. All right. And now, all right. So I think that the conditions are right to make this a famous exemplar if they pull something like this in Wisconsin. Besides which, we've all learned that Waukesha County is crucial.
Yeah.
So we can probably
remember
this.
We've also learned how to pronounce Waukesha County, Protosewicz. I mean,
That's
if we can do
serious.
those things, we're obviously paying attention to Wisconsin.
Yeah. So, I mean, I hope they don't try it. But if they do, I guess we can really go to town on it.
Make them pay.
All right. That's interesting. That's some good mechanics.
Make them pay at the ballot box anyway.
Right. Okay.
Anyway, so that's the story. That's what's going on.
And
I thought that was a really important story that we're going to have to follow.
Yeah.
But things may come to a head within the next week. We'll see which way they're going.
Yeah. All right. And plus, we get to watch Ken Paxton being impeached in Texas. And
yeah, well, you have that to tide you over. And, of course, we have legal maneuverings nearly every day with all of the Trump indictments and so on and so forth. And then I'll leave you with this as we sign out at 9:57. But this is a Greg Sargent piece. Is Trump disqualified for 2024? Here's how we'll soon find out. And the answer is at state level.
Yeah. I mean, maybe. I mean, it'll be pressed. Yeah, we know the
Take
story.
Pennsylvania, he says, under state law.
Please.
When a candidate applies to appear on the ballot, any person eligible to vote in that contest, there's your standing, has 7 days to challenge the candidate's constitutional qualifications in state court.
Okay. When do the 7 days start?
As soon as the candidate applies to appear on the ballot.
Okay. Has he done that in Pennsylvania? We'll have to check it out.
I don't know.
We'll look. All
In
right.
2016, a voter challenged Cruz's candidacy in Pennsylvania, arguing he was born in Canada.
Yeah. Was he?
The Supreme Court ruled for Cruz, but the point is, you get to take it to the courts and let the courts deal with it.
Yeah.
And you know what? States are built
busy
for this, and states put this in so that you could do stuff like that, and it's been done, and it's not a precedent-setting thing, so get used to it.
Okay. And how many states have we got?
We got 50, and
All
it only
right.
has to work in one state to get a ruling that somebody challenges, and there it is in the Supreme Court.
I guess that's true. And I guess once one state begins, you know how it is with states.
Yeah.
One state gets candy, all the states want to have candy. So
Yeah,
right. Don't make me turn this country around. Although if you have the opportunity to do it, perhaps we ought to try. Yeah. All right. So good luck to people of Pennsylvania with this one. There's other states trying it too. And yeah, I guess the ball's actually rolling on that one. Mechanics. We'll talk again tomorrow?
I suppose.
Okay, fine.
Unless you're impeached.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. That's the program we're doing now, right? Yes, okay. Let's see. Some comments via the site formerly known as Prince or whatever it is that we're calling it these days, Bosengood, saying, let's see, maybe Protosewicz should resign if impeached and no action to convict, and then Evers could appoint her. That's an idea. Is that possibility, right? If you resign, but your case hasn't been adjudicated, yeah, well, I wonder if that would work. I mean, why not? We'll play hardball with it. I mean, the idea of impeaching her and intentionally not adjudicating the case seems to open the door. So, look, good. That's good thinking out there. And we should be brainstorming things like that. Absolutely. Okay, let's see. Other things to catch up on. Well, there are many. Let's go see what's in pocket. As I told you, what's his name? Tarrio, sentenced to 22 years in the federal penitentiary. That sounds like good news. We'll have to wait and see how long it takes to actually get him in there. Other items up for consideration. Oh, you know what? We were reading yesterday, and I'm not sure what to do with it. I got to scroll all the way back, but we ran out of time, as usual, reading through the story of the weird Texas network that had emerged for the purpose of running propaganda campaigns through Gen Z influencers, and that had turned its attention to astroturfing support for Ken Paxton, which was irrelevant for a little while, but then with Paxton's trial starting, became somewhat important again. And I was reading it mostly to put more names on the target list, things that for everybody to have situational awareness of the various names and fly-by-night organizations that had been launched in order to do this stuff, so that when they crop up again in the future, we are aware of them. And we learned, for instance, that some of the participants in this network were, for instance, were responsible for the weird boomlet that wacko right-wing movie Sound of Freedom enjoyed, because, of course, it was a film about the quote-unquote truth about human trafficking, et cetera, which I guess is meant to mean that Republicans were making an accusation and therefore a confession, et cetera, but it was all also very bizarrely QAnon-based in its accusations. And apparently they've got another similar movie out there that they're promoting along the same lines, not along the child trafficking lines, but rather along the same lines, using the influencers to get out there and say things like, hey, fellow kids, have you been waiting in line for your tickets to this awesome film? This time the film is Remedy. That's the title of the movie. It is a new anti-vax film prominently featuring Robert Kennedy Jr., whose presidential bid has been bankrolled by a super PAC run by the guys from yesterday's profile, Bowles. Remember him? Boles, the Today is America CFO. Remember that dumb name for their super PAC, Today is America? So let me read you the rest of the story about these various Texas influencers. One thing I noticed, I guess, for the too long didn't read crowd, and if you were waiting at the edge of your seat, remember that the premise of, first of all, remember that Brad Parscale was involved in these things, and he had used the opportunity for grift to launch his new thing, and I forget what they were calling it, and it was something dumb, and if I scroll back, the name will jump out at us, but I'm looking for something that started with a C that I was, yes, right, Campaign Nucleus. Remember that he was hawking his new thing, Campaign Nucleus, and his big pitch was, just a lot of chatter and buzzwords, really. But I was wondering, so what's the substance behind it? And, of course, the answer is nothing. Remember, they were the ones pitching themselves as the all-in-one digital ecosystem that cuts out third-party platforms and protects conservatives from cancel culture. That was the way they pitched themselves. Stop wasting time using big tech platforms to reach audiences. Campaign Nucleus's website says, talk to people directly. And, of course, the way you talk to people directly is usually through the big tech platforms. And what they're saying is talk to people directly through our big tech platform. We're not big yet. We hope to become big. We're just regular tech. And because we're not big, there aren't very many people on our platform, and you can't talk to people directly, was my first assumption. I was wondering, do they ever come around to explaining what is it that they provide people that helps them talk to people directly? And the answer is no, they don't. They just have buzzwords. They say, well, don't do the big tech. Pay us to get around the big tech gatekeepers. And you say, I guess as a Republican, that's a good idea. I want to do that. And as long as you never ask, does this work, or how does it work? How will I get around the blockade of services run by big technology? And the answer is, give us a check. Well, they never do come around in this article anyway and explain how it is that campaign nucleus thinks they help you get around it. It's just they help you get around paying big tech by paying them instead. Anyway, so as I mentioned, there's this other movie, totally different area of the article, but this is what they're actually spending their time on, this network of weirdos. So one was Sound of Freedom. They also are promoting Remedy. I haven't heard anything about Remedy. I just continually hear blather about Sound of Freedom. If at some point that should emerge as a hot item in right-wing circles, we'll now know about it. Then there was the portion of the article about, for the reason we brought this up was that they were also taking on Paxton as a project. The influencers, as it says here, have also been very vocal about Paxton, parroting anti-impeachment talking points favored by his biggest donors, including Defend Texas Liberty PAC, which gave $18,000 to a similarly named company, Influenceable LLC. Remember that we were talking about that weird dark money organization, Influenceable. Well, they got $18,000 shortly before the Texas House's investigation into Paxton was made public. In the 48 hours before the Texas House voted to impeach Paxton on May 27th, at least 6 of the Fort Worth event attendees, remember we heard about that event yesterday, made strikingly similar posts in which they accused House Speaker Dade Phelan of being an alcoholic, claimed Republicans in name only, or rhinos, were attacking Paxton for his conservative values, like stealing Mont Blanc pens from lawyers in the courthouse, and used a handful of unique hashtags such as Texas, TX, TX Kangaroo Court, and Texas, fully spelled out, Texas Corruption, to rail against the House investigation. But basically stood out like a sore thumb as AstroTurf. Other major social media figures who were not at the Fort Worth event but are pictured on an influenceable website made similar posts supporting Paxton and condemning House leaders. So they're all clearly getting common talking points. More recently, Influenceable appears to be recruiting social media figures to share posts about a new film, another one, that claims that the Texas legislature is secretly controlled by Democrats intent on destroying Paxton. Never heard about that one. This, of course, is a claim that has for years been pushed by Dunn-backed groups. Dunn is the Texas oil billionaire at the center of the Influenceable funding network. Screenshots of the recruitment pitches, or at least one of them, were published recently by the conservative website Current Revolt. And they were offering influencers $50, just straight up. Here's $50 if you share one post about the film. How interesting. Also listed were links to a payment website and to a tweet by Michael Quinn Sullivan, longtime leader of Texas Scorecard, a far-right website that's received millions of dollars from Dunn. Defend Texas Liberty PAC is also primarily funded by Dunn and another West Texas oil billionaire, Farris Wilks. And the social media manager for Pale Horse Strategies, a consulting firm for Dunn-backed political campaigns, also attended the Fort Worth event. Defend Texas Liberty and Texas Scorecard have for years been among Paxton's biggest donors, defenders, and cheerleaders. Texas Scorecard did not respond to interview requests. The leader of Defend Texas Liberty PAC declined requests for comment. In other screenshots published by Current Revolt, the company offered $50 to influencers to share a specific post from Paxton's personal X account on July 26th. I mean, this is just straight up grift. I kind of like it, right? I love it to be out in the open. And just a reminder of just how feeble democratic efforts in this area are versus how outrageous and bold they are. I mean, I don't think anybody really wants to be involved in that kind of grift, but just another example of how easy it is to grift yourself a living in the Republican social media sphere, whereas people go in and out of business over a course of years with great ideas and great organizations on the Democratic side without ever receiving a dime. Anyway, the recruitment text includes the name and number for Influencable's head of recruitment operations and links to a payment portal that's run by a company that Influencible's website lists as a partner. So here's how the tweet you're supposed to retweet, and here's how to go collect your $50. On July 26th, DuRousseau, remember him? DuRousseau's shared the Paxton post to his 144,000 followers, adding that, quote, "There are few patriots in leadership like Ken Paxton." There's plenty of them. Anyway, Dow also shared the post. "Rhinos in Texas are still trying to impeach Ken Paxton. Now they've done it," he wrote. "Stop the witch hunt." Well, that was worth $50 for him. The Texas Tribune reviewed 4 of the leading influencers' profiles on X and Instagram dating to January 2021 and found that most rarely, if ever, posted about Texas politics or about Paxton prior to being offered $50 to do so in May. Pearson led the Teens for Ted group, that was Ted Cruz, in 2015. Other than occasional posts about the border or gerrymandering, he doesn't appear to have frequently engaged with Texas politics. Dow has posted a few times about the border, while DuRousseau's profile has primarily focused on race issues and anti-Black Lives Matter posts, in case you were wondering what they usually do with their time. Cressis, remember him from yesterday? A lot of these names were called out yesterday, and I'll have to just refer you back, but I'll give you the article for you to look them up. Anyway, Cressis, who lives in Texas and served on Younger's campaign, one of the failed congressional candidates, I think, has been more vocal about, or I think maybe state legislature campaign, has been more vocal about state-level politics, telling his 14,000 Instagram followers to vote for Paxton and unsuccessful Arizona gubernatorial candidate Kari Lake, to pull her into this, in 2022, and urging them to vote no on a Michigan ballot measure to expand voting access, a post that he disclosed was a paid political advertisement. And now the real worry here, getting paid by God knows who. Influencible's tactics have been condemned by figures from across the conservative political spectrum, believe it or not. Well-known white supremacist Nick Fuentes has repeatedly railed against the company. So it's good, right? Now, the enemy of your enemy is not your friend. But why has Nick Fuentes railed against them? Well, it is accused, in his words, of working with Jewish political figures to paint him as an informant to federal law enforcement. I didn't realize that was part of their agenda. Fuentes has also taken issue with the lack of disclosure, by social media figures about their ties to the company. It angers him either that he's not getting any of the grift or that other people are, but they're not disclosing it enough. Why are they so afraid of people finding out about Influensible? Fuentes said during a February podcast. Is it? Probably not, because he's asking it this way. But is it because people aren't supposed to know that influencers are getting paid by God knows who to literally follow instructions like animals? I don't think that really bothers him a great deal. It's that he's not getting any of the money. The Federal Trade Commission says social media influencers should make it obvious when they have a material connection, including any financial employment, personal, or family relationship with a brand. But campaign law experts say there is little that state or federal regulators can do to force more disclosures when it comes to political messaging, at least on social media. Ian Vandewalker, an expert on the influence of money in politics and elections at the Brennan Center, said federal campaign regulations have not been seriously updated since the early 2000s. He said outdated rules coupled with recent court rulings have allowed dark money groups and popular social media figures to have outsized and often undisclosed sway over political discourse, which, has occurred to us from time to time. The laws around disclosure of campaign spending assumed a traditional model, like paying somebody to print your ad in a newspaper or paying a TV station to play your ad on the air, he said. Paying an influencer to talk about a candidate doesn't fit into those traditional definitions, and so it's slipping through the cracks. In Texas, there are some restrictions on out-of-state donations and on when donors can give to certain politicians, campaigns, and specific purpose committees, as they call them there. The state also requires disclosures of express advocacy political advertising, which the Texas Ethics Commission says is undefined by law, but includes any time a candidate, a candidate's agent, or a political action committee authorizes political advertising. Will that encompass it? We'll see. Groups and individuals who are not directly connected to candidates or campaigns are also required to make disclosures if they are clearly advocating for the election or the defeat of a candidate or the passage or defeat of a measure. But the state's rules otherwise allow dark money to run amok and do whatever it wants, said Roger Borgelt. I don't know how he pronounces that, but he's an Austin lawyer who specializes in campaign and election law. If you're not actually advocating for or against the election of someone or a proposition, then you pretty much fall outside most regulations, he said. Oliverson, the state Republican representative, said he'd like to address those gaps when the legislature's next regular session begins in 2025. Holy moly, they really got to wait all that long? Though he declined to comment on promotions regarding Paxton because of a gag rule ahead of Paxton's impeachment trial, Oliverson said he was deeply troubled by the idea that influencers are getting paid to advocate for positions without revealing their financial stakes. Is that really the case, that Texas won't have a regular session of its state legislature until 2025? Is that right? Or do they mean 2024? Wow. Anyway, the article finally draws to a close in which he says, Oliverson does, "I'm somebody who cares about truth and motivation." Wow, that's amazing. "I really dislike manufactured outrage and manufactured narratives." Well, when he's not using them, I'll bet. "I prefer people to be honest, straightforward, and truthful. And so I do think that at a bare minimum, these things should have to be disclosed." Well, we'll see whether he puts his money where his mouth is and whether anybody in Texas actually agrees with him. In the meantime, we do get to sit through the Paxton impeachment trial. And I do think they're wasting their money largely on this. But I'm sure it must have some impact somewhere. And people who live extremely online lives will occasionally be fooled by these things, which is probably why they continue to do it, and is why I would like to follow this up. The mention of dark money and dark networks reflected in this piece from Salon, which is much more recent, and I think, here we are, published yesterday, as a matter of fact, and written by Ariba Shah, whose headline here is, quote-unquote, "Dark Right-Wing Network Recruits a MAGA Army to replace 50,000 federal workers Trump plans to purge." We read about that from the AP. We've hinted at that story for quite a while. We read all the way through it yesterday, I think. And this just another take with just a little bit more information, I believe, about, the funding sources of these plans. Project 2025, of course, is extremists' newest plan to set fire to our democracy, according to a watchdog group quoted in the below story. A network of conservative groups, as you know, is gearing up for the potential re-election of Donald Trump, actively enlisting a, quote, army of Americans to come to Washington with a mission to disassemble the federal government and substitute it with a vision that aligns more closely with their own beliefs and ideas, according to the Associated Press. And, show me in the Constitution where it says you can't simply single-handedly replace the constitutional order. Organized by the Heritage Foundation, the sweeping new initiative called Project 2025 offers a policy agenda, transition plan, a playbook for the first 180 days, and a personnel database, the binders full of people, for the next GOP president to access from the very beginning, to take control, reform, and eliminate what Republicans criticize as the deep state bureaucracy. Their plan includes the possibility of firing as many as 50,000 federal employees. Democracy experts, people who live in democracies, view Project 2025 as an authoritarian attempt to seize power by filling the federal government, including the Department of Justice and the FBI, with unwavering Trump supporters, which could potentially erode the country's system of checks and balances. The irony, of course, is that in the name of draining the swamp, it creates opportunities to make the federal government actually quite corrupt and turn the country into a more authoritarian kind of government. Matt Dallek, a professor at George Washington's Graduate School of Political Management, who studies the American right, told Salon, "One of the most important bulwarks of democracy is the career federal civil service," he added. Civil servants often have decades of experience inside their agencies and provide knowledge of policy and law in the federal government that enables them to serve the public. And that's one of the inherent problems with this. Like if you fire all of them and you replace them with political activists, on the one hand, they're brainwashed and they're likely to just rubber stamp whatever they're asked to do. But on the other hand, they sometimes can't find the proper form, or they don't know where, as they say in politics, where the bodies are buried or what levers to pull in order to make things work. The bad news is that they are also inclined to say, who cares? I order it personally to happen anyway. And if there's another idiot on the other end of the line that says, I too am here to simply execute orders, then they might actually just go ahead and try and do it. But I suspect that they'll need to replace more than 50,000 people in order to make this really work. But don't tell them that. The country relies on these people, the federal career civil service, not only to enact administration or presidential priorities, but also to enact the laws and fulfill their oath of office, Dalek said. He pointed to one of the dangers of this project, which includes the purging of federal employees, as he describes it, or the project's plans to fire and replace federal workers en masse in an effort to dismantle the quote-unquote deep state. In basically one fell swoop, if this plan were to be implemented, we would, as a society, lose many of the people who help the federal government function and also the people who are not subjected to the whims of the president, Dalek said. This would make it difficult for agencies like the FBI, DOJ, CIA, you name it, to carry out their nonpartisan missions and fulfill their oath of office and oath to the Constitution, Dalek explained. By replacing federal employees with like-minded officials, Trump-era conservatives are planning to remove federal employees whom they perceive as obstacles to the president's agenda early on. This would avoid, quote, the pitfalls of Trump's first years in office and eliminate the possibility of any resistance a Republican president would encounter, the AP reported. The AP reported that that's what the plan says. The plan is very much, the plan is pro-plan anyway, right? I mean, this would eliminate the pitfalls. That doesn't mean there won't be more pitfalls. Also doesn't mean they're right about it eliminating the pitfalls. And it says would eliminate the possibility of any resistance a Republican president would encounter. Unless, of course, something goes wrong or the plan was never valid in the first place. We wait to see. And I mean, I guess an oversimplified version of what I'm arguing here is you replace literally everybody, and I'm sure that they would try to do it just that way, and put in all Trump appointees who know nothing about the way the government works or what it's trying to do, except they'll take orders, right? And so, fine, the order comes down from Trump or somebody acting on his behalf that the Department of Agriculture should do X, Y, Z. Pay all the farmers $1 million, right? Okay, so in comes the new Secretary of Agriculture, and he says, all right, I understand I'm supposed to pay $1 million to everybody. How do we do that? Where's our bank account? Who do I have to call to get the checks printed for every farmer? I assume we need a database with the name of every farmer on it or every farmer who voted for Trump or whatever we're going to do. Where is that database? And the person at the desk helping him, his executive assistant says, I don't know, call Brad Pascal maybe? I don't have any idea what to do about that. And also, I'm not certain how to get to an outside line on these phones. I don't know how they work. That's literally what ends up happening, right? Well, we'll call the Treasury Department and have them pull that list. And the phone rings somewhere. They can hear it ringing in the Treasury Department, but they don't know where the phones are or they're pressing all the buttons. Hello, hello, hello. And suppose they get through. All right, we want you to give checks to everybody and every farmer in America. Who are those people? How much? What bank do we use? I don't know. Well, that's what having a career civil service helps with. At least if you're going to execute that order, where to call and who to ask to do what. Fill out a form 305, whatever the hell it is, and get me that list. Okay. Well, we'll see whether all the pitfalls are eliminated. Project 2025, of course, is extremists' newest plan to set fire to our democracy. Kyle Herrig, A senior advisor at the left-leaning government watchdog group Accountable.us told the Salon it would allow far-right groups like Heritage and the Conservative Partnership Institute to implement their dangerous wish lists with no regard for everyday Americans. Of course, there's Schedule F, which you heard about when we discussed it yesterday, an executive order from the Trump era, since rescinded by Biden, but which would redefine the employment status of tens of thousands of federal employees, making them all at-will workers and removing protections for everyone in decision-making positions. Upon taking office in 2021, Biden revoked it, but Trump says he'll reinstate it or unrevoke it, depending on how he approaches it. Anywhere from 50,000 to hundreds of thousands of federal employees can be impacted by it, since Schedule F is ambiguously written, allowing political appointees to extend its application from top civil servants to those in lower ranks. Mary Guy, a professor of public administration at the University of Colorado, Denver, told Salon. She was in the article we saw yesterday. The problem with removing job protections from civil servants, the problem, is that experienced executives are no longer protected should they need to speak truth to power and explain the downsides to what otherwise seems like a good idea. That's one of several downsides. They are at risk of being fired for offering alternative points of view or insisting that laws such as the Administrative Procedure Act be followed. And that would, of course, be very disturbing to these Trumpy types of people. But I think a bigger problem is the one we illustrated a while ago in more simplistic terms. There just literally wouldn't be any people who know where the papers are that make things happen. They might try and ignore all the paperwork, but a lot of that stuff is actually not only quite basic, it's not necessarily the case that people need to wait for the official papers, but that some paper needs to arrive.
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show. You know where we are. Netroots Radio. Okay, let's finish up this Salon piece here and see if we can get to the darkness part that I think will add, ironically, shed some light on, what's going on and why we're reading this additional piece about Project 2025. Let's see, we left off with the very basic idea as expressed here by Mary Guy from University of Colorado that, removing protections for the ability to speak truth to power or insist that laws be followed is what's being targeted here. But there's also the problem of literally just knowing how the mechanics of government work, and eliminating all the people who know that could by itself be a bigger impediment than the deep state ever was. It's not so much that there's necessarily a deep state dedicated to resisting Trump as there is a deep state. The deep state is the people who know that if you want to do XYZ, you got to fill out Form XYZ, and which drawer Form XYZ is kept in. And it's not so much a resistance thing as it is, this is just, the stuff that's beneath the big thinkers I'm an ideas guy. I have an administrative assistant who knows where to find the paperwork that goes along with it and which other administrative assistant you're supposed to hand it to in order to kick it up to the right guy to rubber stamp it at the other agency. But that stuff is real and it's important. And it would be a fitting lesson, I think, in the end for MAGA to learn that the deep state is really all about just understanding how to fill out paperwork. But anyway, they're convinced that it's all about resistance for some reason. And where was that resistance, by the way? Let's say in the GSA, when it came to interpreting the very confusing language that basically explicitly forbade the old post office pavilion to be leased to any government official because it would create a huge conflict of interest. But instead, they just said, what the hell, we'll just lease it to Donald Trump to turn it into the Trump Hotel and waive this whole confusing thing about whether or not he's a government officer or a government employee or not, and hand wave at that and say, oh no, he's unique in some way. And blah, blah, blah. And P.S., let's also ignore the emoluments clauses of the Constitution because there's such a deep state conspiracy to resist Donald Trump, except for ignoring the most obvious infractions on their face of the language of the law and the Constitution. But we'll just, ignore all of that because deep state resistance makes it much more likely and much more reasonable that the true fear of the so-called deep state is the functionary level. I don't know what button to press to make the phone call and to whom in order to make this thing happen. We know we want to shake our fists about it and scream that it should happen. And then when we can't figure out how to fill out the forms, we say it's bureaucrats and therefore the deep state. Anyway, back to the story here. Project 2025's nearly 1,000-page policy blueprint, we heard about that, called Mandate for Leadership, serves as a step-by-step, no it isn't, guide for the incoming president, from proposing a comprehensive transformation of the Department of Justice, I bet it's not, to ending the FBI's efforts to combat the dissemination of misinformation. It even includes plans to intensify the prosecution of individuals involved in providing or distributing abortion pills by mail. So they're very angry about various things and definitely have a list of things they want to shake their fist at. But it's not a step-by-step explanation. It's kind of partial instructions. Use the Department of something to, do something about this thing. Well, what do they have to do? Fill out what form? Who calls who? How do you comply with the Administrative Procedure Act? Well, screw all of that. You could try it that way. The next conservative president, which wouldn't do something like this, must make the institutions of American civil society hard targets for woke culture warriors, the document says. In other words, it's not a step-by-step understanding or understandable set of instructions. It's a policy screed. If it wasn't, it wouldn't say something dumb like, we need to make them hard targets for woke culture warriors. This starts with deleting the terms sexual orientation and gender identity, or SOGI. Are we using that as an acronym? Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Project, DEI. Gender equality, gender equity, and any other term used to deprive Americans of their First Amendment rights out of every federal rule, agency regulation, contract, grant regulation, and piece of legislation that exists. Well, removing everything from a piece of legislation, of course, requires acts of Congress. Changing the federal rules normally requires a very lengthy process of disseminating a new proposed rule and having a public comment period. But they, I guess, plan to do away with all of that. Naturally, this will be interpreted incorrectly. And so when you say, well, the first thing we're going to do is delete the term sexual orientation out of every piece of everything. Well, now that means how do you do that? Where do you begin? How do you identify those things? Well, by what process would you remove them? Forget the process. We'll just do it. But even identifying things that have it in there is going to be extraordinarily difficult, up to and including, all right, I'm the new director for doing this stupid thing. I don't know, bring me a list of all the things. Well, we don't have them. Well, bring me the list of people that are working for our department, and we'll we'll make a list and divide it up amongst themselves. All right. And how do we get copies of all these things so that we can search for every instance of these words? I don't know. Yeah. Well, it's going to take you, we'll go to the Library of Congress. Well, they don't have it. Or do I really literally have to read every one of these things? Can I get it computerized and search it? Maybe you can. Well, where do we turn to get a digital copy of it? I don't know. I've never worked here before. I have no idea. I don't know how you get it. Well, call Kevin McCarthy. I'm sure you'll get an answer out of Kevin McCarthy. Why don't you call Murdery Trader Green? She'll tell you, blah, 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 space lasers. Well, it's not the answer, actually. Okay. But they're pretty sure they'll be able to get rid of distributing abortion pills by mail. Anyway, great. There are suggestions to reverse the Biden administration's rule of the use of the federal government's resources to further the woke agenda. They got that, though, and erase them from all policy manuals, guidance, documents, and agendas. From gutting critical climate predictions to dismantling checks and balances to put maximum power in the hands of the president, Project 2025 takes extremism to a whole new level, Herrig said. The project and the dark network, I want to hear about that, propping it up, must be held accountable for their efforts to undermine our democracy, except they haven't done them yet. Although presidents usually depend on Congress to implement policies, kind of because of Constitution, the Heritage Project embraces a perspective known to legal scholars as a unitary view of executive power. This perspective asserts that the president possesses extensive authority to act alone, as the AP report highlights. And because we read the AP report, we know that. But also, we remember the unitary executive period of the George W. Bush administration. It's important to remember where this all comes from. The dangers of subordinating the entire federal government to the whims of one person is like pointing a dagger at the heart of democracy, Dalek said. It's actually like driving it in. But okay. It's a central threat to democracy because what we would lose is some of the important checks and balances that are within the executive branch, and that, frankly, we saw playing out in the run-up to January 6th. While these checks and balances were not perfect, he pointed out, senior officials in the federal government were able to push back on the big lie and the delaying of the certification of the election. It showed that even at the end of Trump's first term, there were some mechanisms in place to defeat Trump's efforts basically to steal the election, Dalek said. The danger of this project is it would weaken these already atrophied mechanisms. That's true. In addition to this, the project would also demonize civil servants who do the type of work that keeps democracy functioning, he added. So, an attack on them is an attack on democracy, and that's why I think the advocates of democracy are so concerned about the future of the country. Dalek said, all right, well, I didn't learn nearly as much as I had hoped from the sound of the headline. I wanted to know about what makes the right-wing network doing this dark. But not much information about that one. But a good reminder that in all likelihood, their comprehensive game plan is really more, non-specific, generalized. Well, we're going to get rid of woke. Right. So, okay, day one, here I am, the deputy secretary of whatever. And, John, come on into my office and bring all the woke stuff with you and a book of matches. Like, how do you get rid of whatever that is supposed to be? And, I don't know. So, I mean, it's not that this isn't a threat. It's just that it probably won't work nearly as well as they think. But it does bode ill. That, I mean, I think they can probably accomplish the firing of at least a significant portion of the people that they worry would stand in their way, maybe even everybody, but then replace them with who? Like, well, Joe the plumber is dead, so you can't put him in office. Not that it would make any difference if you did, even now that he's dead. But you could fill the ranks with QAnon morons. And then what happens? I mean, crazy stuff will get said to the newspapers every day, but will things happen? And believe me, it's also bad when things don't happen. There's lots of crimes and outrages that you can commit by omission. But if they think, will be able to implement these changes. I'm not certain that they can. And they'll also find that, what has Trump's track record been in appointing the best people, right? He always said that was part of his appeal in 2016, was that he knew who to appoint, and only the best people, et cetera, et cetera. And how many times did he end up firing them? Because as it turns out, the people that he thought would execute his vision actually wouldn't. So, that times 50,000, times 100,000, he couldn't find a chief of staff that would do what he wanted. So, I'm not certain that he'd be able to find the personnel to make certainly not to make the things he wants happen, but he could certainly make things get all screwed up by omission, all the things that are supposed to happen. But then as people's Social Security checks don't show up, maybe some pitchforks and torches come out. Anyway, other things to catch up on here that I thought I would throw in there. Let's see. There's a couple of strange items having to do with the way things are going haywire in Florida, of course, and others. I guess I really should touch on this, though. I'll read you the New York Times piece about the news that Alabama's congressional district map is in trouble in the courts again. And everyone, I think, heard that news, at least in passing. But I will add to that with another story. But first, the general background story. Federal court again strikes down Alabama's congressional map, says the New York Times, specifically Emily Cochran of the New York Times. Subheader reads, Republicans failed to comply, remember that, with a court order to create a second majority black district or something, quote, close to it. Bad idea, the judicial panel said. So it seems like they're caught out again, and we'll see what the next step is here. Emily explains everything, or at least sets up a lot of questions, we'll say. A panel of federal judges rejected Alabama's latest congressional map on Tuesday, ruling that a new map needed to be drawn because Republican lawmakers had failed to comply with orders to create a second majority black district or something, quote, close to it. They were not close enough, I guess. In a sharp rebuke, the judges ordered that the new map be independently drawn, taking away the responsibility from the Republican-controlled legislature while chastising state officials who, quote, ultimately did not even nurture the ambition to provide the required remedy. The legislature had hastily pushed through a revised map in July after a surprise Supreme Court ruling found that Alabama's existing map violated a landmark civil rights law by undercutting the power of the state's black voters. The revised map, approved over the objection of Democrats, increased the percentage of black voters in one of the state's 6 majority white congressional districts to about 40% from about 30%. In its new ruling, a 3-judge panel in Alabama found that the legislature had flouted its mandate under the court's ruling. And remember, it's important, those are Alabama judges drawn from Alabama ranks, and at least Alabama and its close neighbors anyway, at the behest of and with the agreement of Alabama's senators. So, they're not out-of-towners. The law requires the creation of an additional district that affords black Alabamians, like everyone else, a fair and reasonable opportunity to elect candidates of their choice. The judges wrote, the 2023 plan plainly fails to do so. Responsibility for a new map now falls to a special master, one of the actual normal uses of special masters, not like the abusive and overruled usage of special masters as Judge Cannon saw it in Trump's Pervolago documents case. But the special master is Richard Allen. The special Allen is Richard Master as well, vice versa. A longtime Alabama lawyer who has worked under several Republican attorneys general, and a cartographer, David Ely, or Ely, I don't know how he pronounces it, and when it's E-L-Y, and it's the town in Minnesota, it's Ely, but it may be Eli, E-L-Y. David E-L-Y, a demographer based in California. Both were appointed by the court for this task. The state officials State officials have said that a new congressional map needs to be in place by early October in order to prepare for the 2024 elections. But I imagine cartographers are quite skilled and can probably even work quickly. The litigation has been closely watched in Washington and across the country as several other states in the South, similarly, for some strange reason, face similar voting rights challenges. And control of the U.S. House of Representatives rests on a thin margin. Prominent lawmakers in Washington, including Speaker Kevin McCarthy of California, and Democrats in the Congressional Black Caucus, have kept careful tabs on the redistricting effort. What happens in Alabama this summer underscores the necessity for the judiciary to continue to be unwavering in its obligations to enforce the critical protections of the Voting Rights Act, said Eric Holder. Remember him? Former Attorney General and head of the National Redistricting Foundation, the Democratic group that has backed several voting rights-based map challenges, including the one in Alabama. The Alabama Attorney General's office appealed the ruling on Tuesday evening. While we're disappointed in today's decision, we strongly believe that the legislature's map complies with the Voting Rights Act. That's not true. And the recent decision of the U.S. Supreme Court, the office said in a statement, despite it being absurd. Lawyers for the state also asked the court to halt its own order and to allow the 2023 map to be used during the appeal, arguing that without doing so, the state will be compelled to cede its sovereign redistricting power to the court so that Alabamians can be segregated into different districts based on race. See, they're the ones protecting us from the real racism. Wink, wink. At least one nonpartisan political analysis has predicted that at least one Alabama district could become an election toss-up with a new map, given that black voters in Alabama tend to vote for Democratic candidates. The decision was joined by Judge Stanley Marcus, who was nominated by former President Bill Clinton, and by Judges Anna M. Manasco and Terry F. Moorer, both named to their posts by former President Donald J. Trump. Judge Marcus, typically, by the way, sits on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit in Atlanta. For Alabama, the ruling caps off nearly 2 years of litigation, marking yet another instance in the state's tumultuous history where a court has forced officials to follow federal civil rights and voting laws. And it's important for you to note that, ruling caps off, and although it may not cap it off, there may be more because there's an appeal pending, but they've been litigating this for 2 years. That is also pretty much the congressional election cycle, and Alabamans and Republicans everywhere have learned that you can just keep delaying from election to election to election by doing 2 years of litigation in which you refuse to acknowledge the point of the previous litigation and then beg the courts to allow you to use those skewed maps one more time while you figure out what to do while 2 more years of litigation are pending. 2 decades ago, a lawsuit forced the creation of the 7th Congressional District, the state's sole majority black district in southwest Alabama. Under the Republican-drawn map rejected on Tuesday, the share of black voters in that district dropped to about 51% from 55%, by the way. It's really making sure that people who have consistently been kept at the margins or excluded as a matter of law from politics have a chance, not a guarantee, but a realistic chance of electing candidates of choice, said Kareem Creighton, the senior director for voting and representation at the Brennan Center for Justice and a Montgomery, Alabama native. The fact that we're having to fight over that principle is really sad in 2023. It's sad whenever you're fighting, but I think he means the fact that we're having to fight it in 2023 is particularly sad. When are you going to wake up to reality? After the 2020 census, which began the process of setting district lines for the next decade across the country, the Alabama legislature maintained 6 congressional districts with a white Republican incumbent. A group of black voters challenged the map under a landmark voting rights law, given that more than 1 in 4 residents of Alabama are black. You'd think that maybe they'd have a more significant chunk of representation, like about a quarter. The Birmingham court said the map would need to be redrawn, but the Supreme Court intervened and said a new map could not be put in place so close to the primary races ahead of the 2022 election. You see how they use the 2-year cycle to just keep things delayed. In doing so, the Supreme Court unexpectedly affirmed the key remaining tenet of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which bars any voting law that results in a denial or abridgment of the right of any citizen of the United States to vote on account of race. The court had gutted much of that landmark civil rights law a decade earlier, and many had expected a similar result with the Alabama case. They thought they would just do it again. But instead, they were ashamed because when they originally gutted it, they said, well, we gutted it because there's no racism anymore and we don't need it. And then Alabama said, oh, you want to see some racism where you'll need it? Here's some. And I guess they got embarrassed by that, which is an amazing thing. Glad to see it happen. But in a week-long special session, Republicans refused, nonetheless, to create that second majority black district and shielded their 6 incumbents from a potentially brutal primary at a moment when the party has only a slim majority in the House of Representatives. Republicans defended their revised map, calling it a fair attempt to keep counties and communities with similar economic and geographic issues together while adhering to the Constitution. Democrats and black voters who brought the challenge called it a squandered opportunity to provide equal representation to a historically disenfranchised block of voters. But they want to squander it, so, well, they're right, but it's intentional. At a hearing in August, the panel of judges sharply pressed the state's attorneys on whether the revised map had done enough to adhere to their guidance on how to address the voting rights violation, making their skepticism clear. What I hear you saying is that the state of Alabama deliberately disregarded our instructions, Judge Moore said at one point. In a separate order emphasizing the need for swift action, the 3-judge panel laid out instructions for the drawing of an independent map. The special master will have until September 25th to produce 3 proposed plans that comply with the Voting Rights Act and the Constitution, at least in his view, and that include a second district with a black majority, or that otherwise offers black voters an opportunity to elect a representative of their choice. Objections to those plans can be filed within 3 days of their submission to the court. If a hearing on the objections is deemed to be necessary, the court will convene one on October 3rd. So September 25th is the next date to watch to see what happens with those maps. So for a slightly different perspective on what's going on here, Mark Elias over at the Democracy Docket, and when he's not in court pressing these issues himself, has written this piece for us. In defending their congressional maps, Republicans keep defying the law. That's one of the problems that we have with working with the Republicans in this country. That basket of deplorables just keeps defying the law. Now, he points out at the beginning, it's been a rough year for lawyers tasked with defending Republican redistricting maps in court. At the beginning of this year, the conventional wisdom was that the U.S. Supreme Court would reverse 2 lower court victories achieved by Democrats and their progressive allies in early 2022. Then the seemingly unconventional happened. Well, unexpected anyway. First, in Allen versus Milligan, the Supreme Court upheld a lower court's decision to strike down Alabama's new congressional map for failing to comply with Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, or VRA as we know it. A 3-judge panel had held that Alabama should have drawn 2 rather than 1 districts in which black voters could elect their candidate of choice, as you know. To the surprise of many, the Supreme Court reaffirmed an important part of the VRA that requires the creation of minority opportunity districts in circumstances like those in Alabama. And then weeks later, the court rejected the fringe independent state legislature theory. Remember that? Where it was used in a redistricting case from North Carolina. Once again, the court's majority rejected the invitation from right-wing advocates to disregard decades of settled precedent by creating an entirely new legal doctrine. The opportunity was there. They didn't take it. Occasionally, they do surprise us, right? In normal times, the Supreme Court handing 2 high-profile losses to the GOP would have settled much of the remaining lower court docket related to redistricting. But we don't live in normal times. Everyone just claims, I don't think that applies to me. I appeal. Let's make more trouble. Let's make this last 2 years. Alabama's Republican-controlled legislature was unfazed by the Supreme Court's decision or the prior federal court order requiring them to enact a new map with 2 districts in which black voters either comprise a voting age majority or something very close. Instead of complying with the order, they defied it. Now, this did not go unnoticed by the 3-judge panel charged with implementing the Supreme Court's decision. In a sweeping 222-page opinion and order issued on Tuesday, the court excoriated Alabama for not even nurturing the ambition, as we said, to provide the required remedy. We are not aware of any other case in which a state legislature, faced with a federal court order declaring that its electoral plan unlawfully dilutes minority votes and requiring a plan that provides an additional opportunity district, has responded with a plan that the state concedes does not provide that district. The court in Alabama is not alone. In neighboring Louisiana, Republicans are following a nearly identical script, because 2 years at a time works, right? They, too, drew a congressional map that violates Section 2 of the VRA, and they, too, thought the Supreme Court would rescue them from having to comply with this landmark law. And now, after the Supreme Court's decision in Allen, they are also trying to escape the law's requirements that they draw a second black opportunity district. Like Alabama, Louisiana seeks to glide past prior court rulings in the case and past the Supreme Court's decision in Allen. They're simply saying, you said Alabama has to do it. We're Louisiana. See? 2 more years. Let's fight. A nearly identical set of facts and laws are playing out this week in a federal courtroom in Georgia. Good old Georgia, where they're not doing this stuff, right? Oh, except they are. Once again, the Republican-led legislature in Georgia drew a new congressional map that is being challenged for failing to create an additional black opportunity district in the Atlanta region. And again, the court's preliminary ruling suggests that the state will lose in a blaze of defiance. Sadly, Republican extremism and redistricting is not limited to violations of the VRA. Last week, a state judge in Florida struck down the congressional map that Governor Ron DeSantis had insisted his GOP-controlled legislature enact. The court found that the new map violated the Florida Constitution by diminishing minority voters' ability to elect the candidate of their choice. In words strikingly similar to the court in Alabama, the Florida judge added that at the hearing on the parties' outstanding legal issues, defendants Florida House and Florida Senate conceded as much. The most bizarrely lawless spectacle is taking place in Wisconsin, where the Republican-controlled legislature is, of course, as Greg told you, threatening to impeach a newly elected state Supreme Court justice before she even decides a single case. You know the reason? And we just add that to the panoply here. In many ways, redistricting is the most political of all acts a legislature must undertake. The movement of a single line, the zig and zag on a map, creates political winners and losers, but that is why the law is so important. It constrains the worst impulse of political actors. In normal times, the current lawlessness of Republican state legislatures would be a scandal akin to George Wallace standing in the schoolhouse doors. But again, these are not normal times. The GOP of today, infused by former President Donald Trump, views following the law as a weakness and complying with court orders as optional. And a party that celebrates an indicted candidate for being indicted, getting called out for preventing black voters from having legal districts is a badge of honor. Yeah, that's kind of what we're having to deal with.
From networksradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Well, now it's your turn to listen to Justice Putnam and the West Coast Cook and Speakeasy coming up next right here on Netroots Radio. What's he got in store for you? Well, let's see. In emulating Trump, the Republican Party is also committing fraud against small donors. And maybe the new investigation of the Kraken releasing Sidney Powell will influence that. Stay tuned.